Well, here we are again, Nick. It's good to see you. The
And,
this is
and it's good to see your new background, much
yes,
better than the messy office you normally have got.
yeah, exactly, yeah. No, I think it's sort of middle of the road sort of feeling to this, just so people know which side of the fence I sit on.
Yes, well, they
Yeah,
do now.
yeah, no, it never has been in question actually, but let's be clear. So we've been talking, had some very interesting discussions about Starmer and what's happening. Um, and there's obviously the two major events. Well, one major event and one irritating event. The first one is the major positive event, I think, is the appointment of Trump in the US and the fallout from that. So I thought that'd be worth talking about. And the second one is an irritating event, which is this notion of Islamophobia month,
Yeah.
whatever that means. So let's do our best not to celebrate that and try and explain why. So yeah, over to you, Nick. On Trump, there's a really interesting scenario which is extraordinarily polarized. I'm interested to know what your observations are of this, and let's have a discussion. As usual, we'll wrap up with some of the actions we feel that we can
Yeah.
take at the end.
So Trump's won the American election. Is Trump a perfect candidate? No, he's not. Does Trump have baggage? Yes, he does. Does Trump say things I disagree with? Yes, he does. But there's something within Trump. There's something within his rhetoric, his nature, his personality that just seems to, that personally, that just gives me hope.
Mm.
And he may be a charlatan. It may turn out he's a charlatan, but we've already had 4 years of him, so
Yeah.
he's already been tested once.
Mm.
But he gives me hope. I hear what he says, the common sense things he talks about, the policies he wants to implement, and I'm across the Atlantic here going, yes. Can we have some of that? Can we have a man's man? Can we have a leader who's masculine? Can we have a leader who will put the people first? Not the people of the world first, but the people who he's been elected by to represent them. Put them first. That's what our leaders are supposed to be about.
Yeah.
So everything he says, everything he does, I'm on board. I'm willing to give him the benefit of doubt on many things. I just think this time round, he knows he's only got 4 years. He can never stand again because that's against their constitution, their laws. He's got 4 years. He knows more today than he did 8 years ago. When he first started this campaign and became president, he probably didn't know what the hell he was doing. He knows now. He's going to take no BS from anybody, from any institution. I hope he's a wrecking ball to the establishment, to the blob, to the swamp. I believe he's bringing Elon Musk on board to start cutting the waste. Elon Musk cut something like 90% of Twitter, sacked 90% of staff.
Yeah.
Twitter got better.
Yeah.
So I just hope he does these things. It's not going to be easy. He's going to fight it all the way. But the fact he can never be elected again means he's just going to go for it. And whatever they achieve over there, different system, different people, I get all that. But whatever he achieves over there, we in this country can look and go, we want some of that.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're our politician. You're my MP. You're my councillor. I want some of that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's bang on. I think we've talked a bit about leadership role models or lack of. And I think there's something about his characteristics, about his courage, about his clarity, and I was thinking there's sort of two types of people. I'm a keen cyclist, and you either like climbing mountains or you don't. And a lot of people would prefer to cycle around a mountain. I think there are a few people who actually look a mountain in the face and say, look, how quick can I cycle up that? And I think Trump's one of those people, and he doesn't go around situations. He picks up the phone to whoever it is, and he's pretty clear on a strategy. He's a good negotiator, and there's an element of his truthfulness, his clarity, and also his sort of public ability to make mistakes and sort of get away with it in a very imperfect way. And I think it's very easy for the left wing, less active people that cycle around the mountain to criticise, when in fact, no, what their challenge is actually exactly the opposite, to make them accountable. There still remains a huge amount of people who seem to have no accountability in organisations, and largely probably in the public sector type organisations. He's all about the basics of an economy, supporting entrepreneurialism, the things we've talked about, taking accountability for making money, the antithesis of victimhood, the antithesis of entitlement, which is the polar opposite of what we've got. We've got a prime minister that's, defined what he feels are working citizens, which are actually exactly the proletariat that he's described, the working class, as being those people who have nothing and sort of don't contribute much and will never have anything, and everybody else is having everything taken away from them. So it's the absolute opposite of that horrible type of ideology we're facing. And I'm really hopeful actually that he's got sufficient interest in the UK to make a difference, and particularly around, he can veto the Chagos Island situation, for example. He can veto that decision. He can heavily influence the whole migration gangs, which he's going to, well, not forget the migration full stop, which he's going to address head on. So I really hope, and I've had a bit of discussion with people who are actually looking to directly take action to, to stop the boats, independently, interesting enough, of the government.
Well, that's the way it needs to be.
I know.
I'm not looking at Trump for Trump to interfere in my country and my government. I don't want him to do that. I'll find it quite insulting if he tries to, because I'm an Englishman living in England.
Yeah.
The democracy, people here decide the future of this country, not some American president. I want him to be an icon. I want him to show us the way, because our politicians have lost. That's what I want him to do. And then you talked about the people criticizing him. It's easy to be a critic. Most critics, that's their job, is to be a critic. They've never produced anything in their lives. But it's easy to criticize someone else. How can someone in our society at the moment now look at Elon Musk and criticize him and criticize him? Look what he's achieved. Look what he does. I'm not saying he's perfect. I'm not saying his ideas are correct. But how can someone who's done nothing, achieved nothing, criticize a man who's done what he's done? We live in a society now where we feel our opinions, our experiences are just as valuable as someone else's, and it's a load of rubbish.
I know. There's no meritocracy, is there?
Most people are better than me. I know that. I'm trying to be better all the time. At no point do I think I've got all the answers and I know everything, because I know I don't. Hence why the woke fools are always criticizing people from the past, criticizing Churchill, criticizing George Washington, criticizing these people who were giants of their times. And just because you've got a 2-2 from a crap university and you think you've got all the right answers now, you think you're better than those people? Absolutely not. But we live in a society now where we think we're better than people who went before us, and we're not.
Well, I think we've given those people psychologically, there's a divide between the sort of entrepreneurial types, and I don't like the word left wing, but the sort of more entitled types, let's say. But we've given them a set of professionalized tools around victimhood, scapegoat and terror, which enables them to fight from a false sense of virtue to attack anybody, and no one's safe, including Musk. I mean, you're right. It's so absurd, the notion to lock up Musk for free speech. It's the most absurd, given what he's achieved and, antithesis of democracy and the rest of it. So,
let me just jump in there for one point. You said that they're fighting. I don't think they are fighting. To fight, you have to risk something. To be a far left woke idiot, you risk nothing, because almost everything's on your side. The institutions, the government, the zeitgeist, the Overton window, everything is basically on your side. You risk nothing criticizing Elon Musk. So they're not fighting. They're just parroting. Parroting, is that a word? Parroting?
Yeah, it works for me. Yeah.
Yeah. What they know is acceptable. The people who are fighting are the people who are risking everything.
You're right.
You're risking your livelihood. I've already damaged my livelihood and still risk it now.
Yeah.
Trump is risking his life. He's had 2 assassination attempts on him. Elon Musk, if Trump would not have won, Elon Musk would have been destroyed by Harris's government. These are people who are fighting because they're risking something, shouting from the sidelines with no personal risk. For me, you're not fighting at all.
No, it's intentional. Well, it's intentional destruction. Marxism is about intentional destruction without a successful outcome. So you're absolutely fighting for nothing apart from just to create problems. A bit like an irritating sort of school kid, yeah. And what do you make of the polarization that we're left with? Because there's a huge legacy of people in the UK who are quite happy wearing some Palestinian flag and goodness knows what else. And there's not a whole lot of discussion happening between the two right-wing parties. Do you see that sort of repairing itself over a period of time, or how do you see that working out?
It won't repair itself anytime soon. We've always had, every culture has different people with different views. So the people who are marching on the Free Palestine marches, most of them are Islamists, are descendants of migrants, or are migrants, or are anti-Semites, or are just pink and fluffy and don't want to see children die on their phone. I get most of that. But a lot of these things can change overnight. I'm surprised it's gone on as long as it's gone on. I thought something else would have taken over the attention of those people, but it hasn't. It's carrying on. We're not going to be. I don't think we're going to coalesce around anything. I think we're going to keep being this divided until there's an external threat. I posted a half jokey comment on Twitter the other day that what we need is a third world war. And then I said, China, will you start some shit, please? Because I think it's going to take an external threat to bring everybody together. But in the meantime, I just want common sense. I just want some reality and some decent values. And most of the people, I don't think with that, there's always 5-10% on either end. We've got people who are, more very far left who wants a socialist utopia, good for them. And then we've got people on the right who want zero tax and zero welfare state. I'm probably to the right of the middle somewhere. But the middle is 80%, I reckon, of the population. So that's what dictates the future of this country. And at the moment, we just need leadership. I think it all comes down to leadership. No one inspires us anymore. The Labour Party, Starmer only won the election through default. Nobody wanted Labour. No one wanted him. We just decided we hated the Tories more. And we need, at least I disagree with lots of things around Tony Blair. Never voted for Tony Blair. But I could always see why people wanted to vote for him. He had a vision. He told you where he was taking us to. Again, I didn't want to go to those places, but I could see why people liked him and wanted to vote for him. Same with Thatcher. But then since Blair, I mean, we had a bit of Tories with Major. Major, again, had no vision. But then since Blair, we had Cameron. Cameron was, do you like these policies? Because if you don't, I've got some more policies. You might like them instead. And then Theresa May didn't know what she was doing. Liz Truss, how Liz Truss got to be prime minister shocks me. Boris Johnson lied his way to the top.
I think Liz Truss shows how broken the Conservative Party membership is.
She's a Lib Dem who used to be a Lib Dem, and she got appointed. The same with Theresa May. They got appointed because we're women, and they tapped into, I could be a new Thatcher. That's how they got elected. I could be a new Thatcher. And it turns out they were nothing like Thatcher. I just want people with a vision. I mean, that's why I've got a little bit of respect for Corbyn. Never would have voted for him. I disagree with almost everything he ever says.
He's looking moderate now, isn't he?
But at least he had a vision.
Yeah.
At least he believed in what he believed in. He wasn't for turning. He wasn't for opinion polls.
Mate.
He had integrity. Again, I
Yeah.
disagree with everything almost he ever says.
He's too close to John McDonnell, though, who basically said he'd never. John McDonnell once said that he'd never speak to a conservative ever, or something along those lines. He'd like totally
Yeah.
polarized.
But at least they're honest. At least they
Yeah.
tell you. Everyone in between are just lying, manipulative, and just want to climb the greasy pole.
Yeah,
And,
but I
and
think
there's
there's
no
honesty,
leadership.
but I think there's honesty, but there's also ideology, and I think
Yes.
you take and if you got a leader like Corbyn or you've got a leader like John McDonnell, let's say, then if the wind changes and there's nuclear war, they'll still want to get rid of our nuclear weapons and not be able to defend ourselves or
Yeah.
whatever. And so there's a real danger in leadership's inability to change. I would just add to what you just said. I think part I agree there's nothing like a good crisis, but I think in some ways the appointment of Trump is going to create that perfect crisis
Yes.
in terms of providing that leadership. And one of the things when it reflects, people say to me in turnaround situations, I create that sense of urgency and I create that crisis. And I think if you are a good leader, you can. I'm not particularly blowing my own trumpet. I'm just sort of thinking about it myself in my experience. But if you have got if you have got a vision, you can create a bit of a crisis. You can create a sense of urgency, and you can.
And then people coalesce around that and
Yeah,
work as a team.
yeah. And as long as it's seen to be fair,
Mm.
then you can get away with most things. And as long as you are seen to listen and can adjust if you get things wrong, then by and large you get away with it.
Mm.
Yeah, no, that's good, interesting. I mean, I think there are people which the only thing I'd add is um, there are people like sort of Rory Stewart, Alistair Campbell,
Yeah.
Emily Maitlis, those sorts of people who are absolutely hell bent on anti-Trump. I mean, it's almost. I mean, the way I describe that is you know they're anti-Trump, but they can't really rationalize why. They use lots of labels which are irrational. They can't articulate his policies.
Mm.
And by the same token, if you ask someone, um, why do they like Kamala Harris? They can't articulate what their policies either are. So there's actually no thinking going on whatsoever. But one thing the left are very good at doing is creating these smoke screens of labels to create what I describe as being a bullshit bubble. And I think it's a bit weird because I mean this is again company turnaround territory because when you get down to that, you talk about the rock bottom situation, Nick, where you have to smell the coffee.
Mm.
That's when you have that oh dear moment. And I've worked with managing directors, grown ups who've been in tears in those situations. It's a very, very difficult place to be if Emily Maitlis or Alistair Campbell or Rory Stewart, whoever they are, all of a sudden realize I'm actually wrong here. I've got this badly wrong. And it's probably also how are they held accountable in an organisation? You can hold the managing director accountable because there's sort of company law, but there are lots of floating journalists who are just not accountable at all, are they? Just feed their own sort of narrative and their own little groups, and they don't ever seem to have anything that brings them up short or challenges their thinking.
And a lot of that is because they think they're better than us.
Yeah,
They think they're special.
yeah,
They've all been to universities, they've all
mm,
had privileged lives, they've all had good jobs.
yeah,
And I can understand how they get there. They get there by thinking, well, look, I was successful as a politician.
yeah,
I got elected this, I ran Tony Blair's campaign. Da, 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 da. Look at me, I am special.
yeah,
Therefore, I must know more than every or most other people.
mm,
And it's that narcissism. And I'm
yeah,
sure they don't think they're narcissists, but they never try to think about how other people think because they don't know how other people think because they never meet them.
yeah,
Once you get that successful, you live in your own bubble. I mean, we're all
yeah,
guilty of living in our own bubbles. But
yeah,
the
yeah,
higher up the chain you go, the more friends you've got to like you.
yeah,
Less likely you're going to go to the local pub because you're going to get some abuse. So you don't want nutcases that's having a go at these people having lunch somewhere. I get all that.
mm,
So therefore, they don't speak to normal people anymore.
yeah,
And they've also got the vision of if I had more sway, if I ruled the world,
yeah,
we'd all live in a better world. That's why they
yeah,
didn't like Trump, because Trump was saying everything that was opposite to the globalist agenda. He's
yeah,
saying, I'm putting America first. well, do you know what? That's not very nice for Africans and Asians that you're going to put America first. And he says, I'm closing I'm going to build a wall. I'm stopping illegal immigration. I'm deporting millions. Well, that's fine for the Americans. That's not very nice for Mexicans and people from South America. That's not very nice. We're supposed to share. We're supposed to get group hugs. We're supposed to be pink and fluffy. And you only can be pink and fluffy and have that view of the world when you live in a safe Western country. Because when you live anywhere else, you realize everyone around you wants to kill you.
Well, you have to be accountable, don't you? You can't be a passenger.
Yeah, and they don't realize what threats there are in the world.
No, exactly. I think that, but also just wishing to labour the point. I think if you look at the sort of the Labour front bench, you've got a whole raft of people which, frankly, the feet really haven't touched the ground. They've got a weird view of what reality is, to the point of lying on a lot of different fronts, like climate change or, you know, the Labour policy. Well, I think there's some sinister ideology running through the whole thing, which is driving most of it. But putting that to one side, if it's based upon lies, the problem is that if you challenge that, and you can see this with Starmer's an expert liar. What he'll do is obfuscate. He'll avoid the truth. He'll totally avoid accountability. There's very little chance of holding these people to account. So I just don't see any shift at all. And our parliamentary system is surely based upon not direct conflict, but it should be based upon debates in the good old days when people were less polarized and less, one way or the other. And there must have been a middle ground. So I think there is. I mean, I studied this in my book, actually, the degree of polarization. I think there's been, in fact, you can see this in the voting figures of the UK population across Europe. How many people, if you use Democrat versus Trump, how many people? There are some countries are voting 90% in Europe. We're about 60% voting for Democrats in the UK. So I think that's a pretty good idea of indoctrination, because indoctrination, if you're indoctrinated, you don't live in the reality, you live in ideology, and you check everything versus ideology, which is quite a nice, comfortable place to be. I wish I was that stupid. Or whatever the right word is. But I think there's a nasty wake-up call when the rubber hits the road.
There is. I think one of the problems with the Labour Party is the majority is too big. And I think consciously and definitely subconsciously, all those ministers and the Labour Party have said to themselves, we're popular.
Yeah.
Have you seen our majority?
Yeah.
Everything we want to do, the people are behind us. They are. There may be silence, but they're behind us. Look, we look at our majority. Yeah. Now, we know that's not true. They won by default. But that's keeping them going. That's keeping them on their path, thinking the people are with us because look at the majority. But I think it's a big majority, but it's thinly spread across the country. It can easily go. I think there's a very good chance there'll be a series of events that we won't be able to predict that forces this Labour government into an early election in the next couple of years. It can be a mixture of things. So the Labour Party is already having a little bit of a civil war about certain stuff.
Yeah.
So let's put
split, doesn't it?
Yeah. So let's put some scenarios together here. So we need America. Americans don't need us, but we need America.
Yeah. Yeah.
So part of that deal with America will be the UK has to support Israel more. So we support Israel more. That upsets half the Labour MPs in Parliament. Yeah. That's the beginning of a real civil war.
Yeah.
Then something else might happen. One MP gets, there's an MP at the moment in Cheshire who's just been charged with common assault for smashing one of his constituents in the face drunk outside a pub.
Mike Ainsbury, yeah.
Yeah, so I know Mike Ainsbury. I used to sit in meetings with him when I worked at Manchester Council. I'm quite shocked. He always came across as
a drinking buddy, no doubt, Nick.
Yeah. He came across as a very nice man. He was a nice man in those meetings. But there's lots of things that could go wrong. That let's say we get some power outages. Power goes off a couple of times because of our push towards net zero. Lots of things. The farmers are all upset now. 19th of November, the farmers are planning on shutting down London with their tractors like the Europeans do. Yeah. There's many things. One thing won't do it, but one thing will be the straw that breaks the camel's back. And I can definitely see in a couple of years this government having to go back to the electorate and being wiped out.
Yeah. I think there's two factors that probably would destroy it. One is, can you imagine working for Starmer? Just the most intolerable position. I think that's part of the problem. I think the second thing is actually the Labour Party. There are a lot of good people in the Labour Party who are being forced to vote in a way that they don't want to vote on a number of issues, like the penalising the pensioners and all that stuff.
Well, but in which case, I'll challenge you there and say they're not decent people, are they?
Well, no, they are. But I think what will happen is they may start off that way, but it'll unwind, because if you do that too many times, you get very stressed. It's going to do your head in. If you're asked, Nick, to vote on one amendment wrong, you're going to get very angry if you care. If you ask to to vote against your will on three, it's like this escalating bolt of anger. And I think the Labour Party likely to rip themselves apart. But also, I think the economy could collapse. I think we could, and we are experiencing civil unrest.
Well, let me just say this: the day after Trump's election, all the financial and indicators, the stock market went up, business confidence went up, all those things went up.
Yeah.
What's happened with all our financial indicators in the UK? They've all gone down.
I know. It's just a bloody joke. But yeah, I mean, it's just ridiculous. So on that positive note, let's just talk about Islamophobia, just to warm things up a bit.
Yeah.
I really do find this grossly duplicit, dishonest on many fronts. What are your thoughts about it, Nick? In terms of, is it Islamophobia month?
Yep, November is Islamophobia month. Never heard of it before until a couple of days ago, when the leader of Manchester Council, who I personally know, many years ago, but I know, put a tweet out going, "It's Islamophobia month. We need to celebrate everything the Muslim community has done for Manchester. We need to stop hate," and just a normal diatribe of bullshit you'd expect.
Yeah.
And I commented that, well, if the Islamic community sorted out the Islamist nut jobs in their community, ordinary Muslims would be treated better in Manchester and across the country. Yeah. That's the problem. Everybody else jumps on board that, not my tweet, but their tweet. And eventually they deleted their own tweet because the amount of abuse the council got.
Yeah.
Now, we need to understand why.
Well, that's good in some ways. I'm quite pleased because it's good to see that being challenged.
It backfired. It all backfired for them. Yeah. And the reason why it backfired is because a 1-minute walk from the leader of Manchester Council's office is the Manchester Arena, which is down the road from my street, where 22 young people were blown up 7 years ago. Right. Now, we've never come to terms with that. We've not come to terms with all the other Islamic terrorists over the last 20 years in this country. I just wrote an article on it last couple of weeks ago.
We just don't accept it. We never learn from it, do we?
No, we don't. So there's been 93 Islamist terrorist attacks. Sorry, 93 people in this country have died over the last 20 years from Islamic terrorist attacks.
Wow.
And 1 or 2 Muslims have died from anti-Muslim attacks.
Yeah.
Or the far-right attacks. So we know where the danger is. Islamophobia basically means the unjustified fear, irrational fear of Islam.
Yeah.
But you know what? You should be afraid of Islam because they contain some nutcases, a very small percentage, but they're nutcases. What we need is November should be a month for Muslim community sort your shit out month. That's what we need.
Yeah, I mean, tell us how to do some good stuff. Yeah.
I know lots of Muslims who are not Islamists, who don't like the rape gangs, who speak out, have spoken out about the rape gangs, who don't want the violent nutcases. We need more Muslims to take control of their religion.
Yeah,
and highlight the nutcases, throw them out. We need to deport the ones who are not British citizens. We need Muslims marching on the streets against rape gangs. But Muslims only get together and coalesce and demonstrate when it's a Muslim cause.
Yeah.
And that annoys everybody else in the country because they separate themselves from us, and then we wonder why we treat them as separate. But they do it to themselves.
Yeah.
We need sense, and there's many of these people in the community, many of them. We need sensible, moderate Muslims who love their religion and want to practice being a Muslim, which is absolutely fine.
Yeah.
We need them to take charge of their communities, of their religion, and sort their shit out. Because if they don't, bad times are coming.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's right. I think it comes back to what we were saying before about basic courage to address an issue head on. And, you know, I think politicians fundamentally lack courage, because it's really, if you're a politician and you've got any sort of ambition, are you going to stick your neck on the line? And, you know, it's they're not really qualified to do that. They would never, it's not a natural, it's not a natural role for politicians. So, you know,
well, it used to be. It used to be.
Yeah.
What happened was we replaced statespeople with career politicians.
Yeah.
A statespeople, a statesman, a stateswoman would always put the country ahead of their personal convenience.
Yeah.
A career politician always puts their personal convenience above the needs of the people they're pretending to serve.
Yeah.
We replaced, what's the word I'm looking for? We replaced, I forget. Sorry.
All right. I think I think it's also systemized as well.
Sorry, it's come back to it. We replaced public service with self-service.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I think the EHCR has systemized this focus on victims, which has undermined democracy fundamentally, which means that one of the causes of anger is the fact that the minorities therefore are ruling the waves, and the Brits, whoever they are not being represented. I think as well, my concern psychologically with the word Islamophobia is it's a negative generalization. And do you know what the unique thing about negative generalizations is?
Well,
they're always false, right? So the notion, even if you said that Hitler is racist, he's not, because there'd be an element of him that wasn't, you know. And in the same way that, so the very phrase itself is flawed, it's a lie. And so therefore to give a lie credence, you shouldn't give the lie credence. And then you need to look at actually what are you trying to fix? Because if you understand that Islamophobia as a term is a lie, right, then you don't give it any credence. And actually now what's the problem here? What are we trying to sort out? Is it what you've just described? Is it about integration? Is it about, you know, fitting in with British values? What is it? You know, then you can get down to something sensible. But this notion, the problem with this is it gives the weak, spineless politicians something to hide behind, which is perfect. That's what they love. And that's why, in many ways, this woke culture suits them so well, because it means they really don't need to address the facts and address these hard issues. But I'm pleased to say, in some ways, in fact, well, I think Islamophobia, if you give any credence at all, is the Islamic hatred of anything that's not Islamic.
Do you know who created the word Islamophobia?
No.
It was Islamic Brotherhood in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Who's a terrorist organization who's banned in most Middle Eastern and Muslim countries across the world.
It's a very divisive word.
Yeah, they created it for one reason only, and that's because they wanted to reduce the amount of criticism Islam got.
Yeah.
And they saw the word racism, and they saw how white Westerners were so afraid of the word racism that they would bend over backwards not to be called it. So in the 90s, they created a word called Islamophobia, and roll on 20 years, and they've got exactly the reaction they always wanted. It's now, I don't want to be Islamophobic. But you're right, Islamophobic basically means any criticism of Islam. And let's be perfectly honest, out of all the religions in the world at the moment, Islam needs the most criticism because it's a clear and present danger to most of us. That's not to say it's always been like that, and that's not to say other religions have never done that. 1,000 years ago, Christianity was the most dangerous religion in the Western world. You know, we killed loads of people, we had witch trials, all sorts of things went on. So, and this isn't just an Islamic problem or a religion problem, it's just a problem for today. Islam is a problem for today.
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, it certainly needs to be discussed, and I think it's I mean, it comes back to the one thing about Marxism is they're very clever with words. If you look at Marx, Marx was very good at creating these really inflammatory terms, like Islamophobia, like Black Lives Matter, incredibly inflammatory, because once you deviate away from it, you're into this minefield of attack of some variety or other.
They create phrases and words that's maybe hard to disagree with.
Yeah,
How can you disagree with Black Lives Matter? Of
yeah,
course, Black Lives Matter. How can you disagree with Islamophobia?
yeah.
Well, we shouldn't be penalizing Muslims just for being Muslims.
No,
So they're very clever with language. You're perfectly correct.
yeah. So that's what interests me about this. It's not it's what interests me is what is preventing us from having a sensible conversation about this sort of stuff, Nick. Um,
It's the Islamists
yeah.
because the
No,
Islamists
sorry.
don't
What I
want
meant by
us.
that, I was going to sort of try and answer my own question, but it's the psychology of what prevents. So Islamophobia is a word. Black Lives Matter is a word. Racism is a word that prevents us from talking about these sorts of things. And it all comes back to large. I mean, this is really where the link is between Islam and Marxism, because it's very divisive. It's sort of anti-establishment. Um, but I think the bottom line is, as human beings, if you have these barriers to us having a sensible conversation, if let's say you were Islamic or I was Islamic and we wanted to have a conversation, if we had all this nonsense in our vocabulary, Nick, we would never develop a proper relationship. We'd never be friends. We couldn't. There were too many things we can't talk about. And the problem with that is that it doesn't have any integrity. You never really get to the truth. And in a business context, that's a disaster, because it's a whole raft of blind spots that are a big threat, because something can pop out those things that people aren't talking about because it's in your blind spot and it's too difficult. Let's not talk about it, but it'll come and get you. Um, and the only option if people stop having healthy relationships and talking to each other is physical violence. It's the only thing you've got.
Yeah.
If you fall out, that's the tragedy. So for me, open dialogue, healthy dialogue. I use the analogy of a jazz band. When you've got intimacy between a group of people who are playing musical instruments, and I'm not the slightest bit interested in jazz, but I think as a metaphor, it's quite helpful. and they're intimately playing, on an ad hoc sort of improvisation type way, listening to the audience. So they're actually listening to the audience rather than just doing their own thing, and they're just creating something quite beautiful. And it's much about the relationship between those people that's interesting, as opposed to necessarily the music. But the music, because of the way it's created, is also nice. And I think that's the sort of place I like. That's the metaphor I like to think what good looks like. And then you've got various steps backwards of people like Sadiq Khan with his incredibly inflammatory accusations, who's got the whole of the Met Police. He's got his own personal protection. He's got everything, and he says he's afraid of living in London, and
Yeah.
denies the rise in crime. It's just fundamentally untrue.
Mm.
And and then he makes statements about anti-Islamophobia and the rest of it. It's just
Mm.
so incendiary. And I think we've got to hold. Well, I try and hold myself to account, but I think in particular Parliament is getting corrupted with this sort of dialogue, very inflammatory dialogue that nobody really knows how to handle. And I think the other thing that's happening as well in relation to Islam is that people are being voted into Parliament. There's, I think, 25 Islamic MPs now.
I think it's 5 or 6. Five.
Five?
No,
Yeah, maybe.
25. Yeah.
What the hell am I talking about? Yeah, right, 5 or 6. But they're primarily being voted in not for political reasons, but for religious reasons.
Yeah.
And so this is something which is a whole new dynamic. And the ultimate, I mean, the big problem is their blasphemy laws, because it's very clear the way, their blasphemy laws operate around the world, and it's
It is. It
not
is.
congruent with democracy, let's say.
And that's what Islamophobia Month is all about, stopping these conversations.
Yeah,
And the biggest losers from Islamophobia Month are moderate Muslims.
yeah,
It's another way of silencing them, because if they speak out, it's like, oh, you're just promoting Islamophobia now. You're
yeah.
damaging the community. Honestly, how many times I've said we need moderate Muslims to speak up and be loud
I know, but they
and
won't.
be
They're too
counted.
afraid. They're
Well,
too afraid.
they're also afraid of the Islamists themselves.
Yeah.
They don't get airtime from the government. They don't get airtime from any
No.
of the mainstream media. When the mainstream media want a Muslim voice, they go to a community leader who's usually a foreign imam.
Yeah.
Why are we having them on our TV? Let's get someone who's born here, someone who
Yeah.
holds
True.
our values. They just have a different religion.
I agree.
Religions change over time. I don't
Yeah.
want to ban Islam. I don't think Islam's evil. I just think we have the wrong version of Islam. But if we empower those moderate British Muslims, they will be able to create a British 21st century version of Islam that is still adhering to the faith, but it needs to go through some sort of
Well,
reformation.
actually, you wouldn't really want them to adhere to the faith, because if you read what they should adhere to, it's not particular. It's certainly not
But we
favourable.
can do this with the Christianity religion as well. You
Well,
just
no,
look in the
well,
Bible.
yes, no, but the Bible is harsh book, but it doesn't. Well, yeah, it's. We could have that discussion, but
Yeah.
I think there's very little comparison between the two, but there is a common denominator.
Mm.
I think. Um, yeah, I think. I've lost my train of thought. Can't remember what I was saying.
Well, yeah. So my roundup there was basically, if we want, Islamophobia month is a complete waste of time. In fact, it's dangerous, and it silences moderate Muslim voices from
Yeah,
improving their own community.
yeah. No, I think I've it's an interesting challenge to that as well. Actually, I heard somebody actually mention that actually in some ways it's the moderate Muslims that prevent us from addressing Islam, because they sort of obfuscate the situation, and there's a question mark as to whether or not they're sort of following the faith, so to speak.
Mm.
Um, so, but whatever, my only interest is to, when I meet someone, to think that they're not going to, their head's in the right place. They want to be in the country. They don't want to destroy the country. They're working hard. They're contributing. They're paying their taxes as best they can. They may fall on hard times, in which case they might need picking up. That's okay. But they're not being stuck in a hotel over and above anybody else. Um, with, in front of the queue, which to me is utterly absurd. Not that that's particularly relating to Islam, as it's there's the people who come to this country are not necessarily Islamic. Um, but yeah, I think it's a very divisive word which prevents us from talking to each other. So the main action which I'm personally interested in is to, you know, in my own sphere, to try and hold people to account and myself to account for my own dialogue, to make sure I'm not spouting inflammatory stuff whilst being truthful as well. And
Mm.
there's a fine dividing line, and that's really around the nature of dialogue, um, because people confuse being truthful with being offensive, with being dead to dead, because all this offence legislation is very problematic. And there's plenty of Christian pastors who are completely harmless individuals who are getting arrested in the streets for causing
Yeah.
offence, which is fundamentally undermining our democracy and our
Yeah.
culture and pretty much everything else. So I just want people to have natural conversations. You bump into someone in the street, you feel like talking to them. One of the most inspiring things I do, I go to a church in London,
Mm.
and it's in the central. It's the population must be 99% black, and I'm the only white person in the place. If anybody ever calls me racist, come to my church. I'm the only white. But I find these people
But that's
extraordinarily.
exactly what a racist would say.
Yeah,
A racist would go to a black church, so they then couldn't be called racist. The more you talk about this, the more you're coming across as a racist.
yeah,
That's what an anti-racist would say.
yeah, probably. Well, that's another corruption. But I find these people extraordinarily inspiring, just because they want to fit in, just because they're trying to work, just because they haven't got a great deal. It's not a wealthy part of London. And I just find the whole thing very humbling. And the common link is Christian faith as well, which runs through the whole place. So you've got a common denominator, which um, which is, and there's the learning in the church. So there's this community feel from people from all around the world, and I think there's 167 different nationalities in the same
Mm.
service. It's extraordinary. But as far as I'm concerned, I don't at all feel threatened by any of them. I'd speak to any of them. they can speak to me. I'm not conscious of, what color their skin is. I'm just more conscious, of, whether or not there's that healthy dialogue, whether there's not that healthy sort of perspective that they're happy to be in the country and,
Yeah, I mean,
contributing that sort of stuff.
that's great for your church because you've all got a common bond there. You're all Christians.
Yeah.
You're all worshiping together. That's great. But for the wider society, we need more than that because we now have more than one religion in this country. So it can't just be the church anymore now. We'll have mosques, we'll have temples, we've got all sorts of things. What we're craving in this country is an overarching belonging. Now, is that Britishness? Is that the monarchy? That's what we need to figure out. And that's what we need to start promoting because we need an overarching sense of belonging to this land that pulls us all together. And it doesn't matter if you're a Jew, you're a Hindu, you're a Muslim, you're a Christian, because we've all got something more important than that in common, which should be the love of this land, the love of our monarchy, the love of our institutions, the love of our history. It has to be something to pull us together. Otherwise, we're just separate groups living on an island, and that eventually will lead to violence when bad times come.
Yeah, I think, I think that's absolutely right. It is about defining what the common denominators. I think, though, that there are some oil and water situations in some faiths which need to be addressed. I think the acid test is we've got to be able to. I mean, this is one of the reason why Tommy Robinson is concerned. In Luton, he was concerned because the communities were not integrating at all, Nick. They were absolutely just operating in their own, own way as sub cities, and
that happens all over Greater Manchester. I've been to those communities.
Yeah, and I think that in its own right is problematic because it means that people are less likely to speak to each other.
Yes. Well, it's not less likely. They don't speak to each other.
They don't, do they?
Many people in those communities don't speak English, and there's no need to speak English because everyone they interact with, the shops they go to, who they socialize with, none of them speak English.
Yeah.
Now we need to understand why that happened. They didn't come here to do that. They came here because their country, their ancestors let them down and didn't produce the country they think they deserve. So they came here for a better life and they got it.
Yeah.
But once they got here, our politicians then let them down again because we allowed them to keep their failing culture and their failing traditions. And
we were too weak. We were too weak to set out our stall, weren't we?
Well, I don't think it can be weakness, but it was also this pink and fluffy nonsense.
Yeah.
That we should have demanded that they integrate and they become English and British, but we didn't. So therefore, they didn't.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because we talked a bit about Nick from UKIP. He's very clear on this stuff. And actually, it's very interesting when you look at the difference between what Nigel Farage says, which frankly is a bit mealy-mouthed, versus because there are lots of things they don't talk about. We talked about blind spots, but they don't talk about these things that we're talking about. And UKIP, Nick Tenconi is very clear on these issues. And rather like Trump, there's something very attractive about somebody who addresses something head on and doesn't isn't mealy-mouthed about it. Regardless, frankly, if they're right or wrong, it just provides a line in the sand, and it's an example of leadership, isn't it?
It's also an example of truth. So if you're willing to tell me something I don't like, that means when I hear you say things I do like, it means I can believe it.
Yeah, true.
Because you're not choosing your words and what you say to get me to like you or vote for you. You're just telling me the truth. So when I hear the things I like, I go, he means that.
Yeah. I think, I'm slightly encouraged actually this latter part of this conversation. I think there's the right heart in the UK to do the things we're talking about. We're in a good place. Do you know what I mean? We're in a good place to start that process.
I'm very positive. I have been for years.
Yeah. And I think the Brits are good at that. We just need to find the courage to be and find, as you said, the right leadership as well. We need the right leadership.
We do.
Because one thing, there's an interesting survey done ages ago, and the one thing that governments can do, The interesting thing about governments, they don't really do anything, right? Because you and I just get on and do our stuff, whatever it is, Nick. You know, you got out of bed this morning, you did whatever you did, I did whatever I did. Didn't really have much to do with Keir Starmer. We might not like the bloke or whatever, but it doesn't really affect, you know, what I did. I took the dog for a walk, whatever, and I still took the bloody dog for the walk. But one thing, there's an interesting survey that was done a long time ago. They said, and the one denominator that governments really can make a difference with is how people feel.
Yes.
Yeah. And
that's exactly why Boris Johnson won the 2019 election.
yeah,
he sold us a Churchillian dream.
yeah,
Turns out he was a liar and a fool,
yeah,
but we all bought into it because we wanted a dream of a better tomorrow. We
yeah,
didn't expect him to deliver it overnight or in his parliament, but he sold us a vision of the promised land. And when you have those visions, people will follow you for years
yeah,
if you're taking them to the promised land.
yeah. I don't think he had the strength to see that through. He made the wrong decisions, but you're right. I think he was visionary. He also represented, I think, a degree of Britishness, like it or like it not, a version of Britishness that um interesting, not Christianity, interesting enough. But yeah, no, that's great. Well, Nick, I think that's been a really useful conversation. Thanks for that. It's been good.
No, I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, is there any other final thoughts on
No, my only thing is I've got a new book out, which I talked about last time.
yeah,
England, My England, where I
yeah,
talk about the destruction of England and what you can do as an individual to save this amazing country.
yeah.
Available on Amazon. Just Google Amazon, Nick Buckley, England, My England. You'll
I
find it.
did that. I did that, and I couldn't find it. Interesting enough. Amazon's really bad for searching. Have you tried to Google it? If you go, so if you go to Amazon and you put in Nick Buckley, England, My England, it doesn't come up. It comes up. There's lots of books called England, My England, but your book
Right.
doesn't come up in the list. It might be worth quoting the ISBN number, although that's a,
Yeah.
it's a bit of a long,
Well,
boring number.
if you Google Nick Buckley MBE,
I
Amazon.
did that, Nick, as well.
All right.
Try it,
Well,
try it.
yeah. Again, Amazon, like all these companies, are far a left wing. This book's a right wing book. They're not going out of their way to advertise it.
No.
But if you go on any of my social media, you'll find me talking about the book, the links on the book, and everything like that.
Yeah, maybe just add the link at the bottom of this up because I was interested in buying one, but I found it.
Well,
The
if I send you the link,
information.
if I send you a link, will you put it in the description of this video?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I'll do
Yeah,
that.
there we go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I'll buy it myself and look at
Right,
it.
cool.
Yeah, nice one, Nick. Have a good day, my friend. See you later.
Cheers. Thank you.
Cheers,
Bye-bye.
bye.
Did you enjoy that video? I think you did. Come on now, hit that bell, subscribe, comment. Let's build this channel. I need more followers. I need more subscribers. Be part of the journey. See you soon.